and after 20 years of sobriety, she starts drinking again, and more. And then enter Vicodin. 12 pills a day?
Yeah, it definitely got up there.
$500? That was the price her own mother once sold her for. Years later, Demi Moore would become the highest-paid actress in Hollywood, earning $12.5 million for a single role in Striptease. But no spotlight was ever bright enough to erase that scar. It followed her through every role, every marriage, every seizure in a silent room where her body trembled on the edge of death from drug overdose. We know Demi Moore from Ghost, her hands covered in clay in that immortal scene, where love conquers death. But in real life, no one ever came to save her. From the abandoned child who watched her mother attempt suicide, to the woman who fell 3 times in love and addiction, Demi Moore lived a life where every light only revealed another shadow. This is not the story of a fallen star, but a requiem for a woman who once traded her soul just to be seen, and spent the rest of her life learning how to see herself again. Because in a world obsessed with admiration, she chose survival. She chose to rise. And she proved that no abyss is deep enough to bury a soul that has learned to love itself. But to understand how a woman could fall from dazzling fame into utter solitude, we have to go back to where all the wounds began: Roswell, New Mexico. Demi Moore was born on November 11, 1962, in Roswell, a town famous for UFO stories, though for Demi, the greatest mystery wasn't in the sky but within her own family. Her biological father left 2 months before she was born, leaving behind an emptiness that would never be filled. Her mother, Virginia, remarried a man named Dan Gine, an ad salesman addicted to alcohol and gambling. They lived in constant hardship, drifting from city to city, running from debt and from themselves. Demi's early years were a blur of endless moves, 30 different homes before the age of 14. No school ever considered her a former student. No room stayed long enough to be called home. Every time her stepfather lost a job, her mother drank. Their belongings were sold off, and life reset from zero. In her memoir, Inside Out, she wrote, "Our home was chaos. I was always waiting for the next explosion." At 12, Demi witnessed something no child should ever see. One night, she came home to find her mother lying unconscious on the floor, her mouth full of sleeping pills. The little girl used her tiny fingers to dig each pill out, trying to save her mother's life. "I remember using my little fingers to dig the pills out of her mouth," she recalled. From that moment, Demi stopped being a child. She became the rescuer in her own home. But fate wasn't done with her yet. At 15, another horror struck, so cruel it's hard to recount without shuddering. A man her mother had met at a bar came to their apartment, acting overly familiar. One afternoon, he waited for her inside. Demi was assaulted, violated, and when she fled in panic, the man uttered words that froze her soul. "How does it feel to be whored by your mother for $500?" That number, $500, became an eternal mark, a twisted sacred figure symbolizing the price the world had set on her innocence. From that moment, Demi stopped believing in love, safety, or trust. She learned to survive by feeling nothing at all. Alongside her emotional trauma, her body also began to fail. Demi suffered from chronic kidney problems, poor eyesight that required thick glasses, and constant bullying at school. Withdrawn and lonely, she carried in her eyes a sadness no one could decode. "I just knew I didn't belong anywhere," she once said. In 1980, at 17, another tragedy struck. Her stepfather, Dan Gine, committed suicide in their garage, leaving the car engine running until carbon monoxide took his life. The man who had frightened her also left behind a terrifying void. "He told me many times he wanted to die. I didn't believe he would," Demi wrote. His death pushed her deeper into a spiral of alcohol, marijuana, and endless nights of intoxication. Self-destruction became her only way to survive, Amid the wreckage, a glimmer of light appeared. A young woman named Nastasia Kinski, a German girl a few years older who lived in the same apartment complex. She was the first person to make Demi believe there could be another path beyond fear and addiction. Nastasia was already modeling, studying acting, and in her apartment filled with fashion magazines and scripts, Demi saw something she had never known: purpose. She had everything I thought I could never have: confidence, beauty, control, Demi recalled. That friendship sparked her first dream of acting and opened the first door out of the hell called family. At 16, Demi left the apartment that had been her prison of alcohol and chaos. She didn't run away out of rebellion, but out of the need to breathe, to escape the stench of liquor and the fear of abandonment. The first person she turned to was Tom Dunstan, a 28-year-old musician. Gentle and seasoned, Tom became her first anchor in life. On smoky nights, he played his guitar while Demi sat silently beside him, feeling, for the first time, seen. But as with everything in her life, warmth never lasted. When Tom grew distant, Demi felt suffocated again. She didn't know how to stay because staying had never been safe. She left, this time for Freddie Moore, the guitarist of the rock band The New Cats, 12 years her senior and already married. Freddie represented another world: freedom, music, and stage lights. He made me feel like I could start over, Demi wrote in Inside Out. He made her believe that love could erase the past, that loving hard enough could heal old wounds. They moved in together in Los Angeles. Freddie wrote songs, Demi helped with odd jobs and occasionally modeled. She began to believe she was being reborn. But as their wedding approached, old fears resurfaced. Not fear of poverty, but of attachment, of losing the fragile freedom she had just found. The night before their 1980 wedding, at only 18, Demi left her bachelorette party and went to see a man she had met on set. "I couldn't breathe. I just wanted to disappear for a while," she said later. It wasn't betrayal, it was panic, the reflex of a girl who had never felt safe with anyone. The next morning, she returned, put on her white wedding dress, smiled for the photos, and officially became Demi Moore. But behind those radiant pictures was a girl who had never known real love, trying to act like an adult while still carrying the 15-year-old inside her who had been sold for $500. Freddie Moore, the man who gave her a home, also reflected her deepest fear, that every love would eventually leave, just like her father, her stepfather, and the world itself. After that fragile marriage, Demi turned to acting as a way to escape herself. She landed small roles in Choices, 1981, and Parasite, 1982, films that made little impact but allowed her to step onto a set for the first time, where she finally felt she could exist without pretending. Though inexperienced, her gaze on camera carried something different. Fragile, yet defiant, as if the character and the woman behind it were separated by nothing but a thin layer of skin. Her real break came when General Hospital, the most popular daytime TV series in America, cast her as reporter Jackie Templeton. Demi quickly became a familiar face to millions, and under the studio lights, she found something new, a place where pain could be hidden yet applauded. But off set, she still couldn't escape the darkness. She drank, she smoked, she kept running from herself. Then in 1985, director Joel Schumacher noticed something rare in her and offered her a role in St. Elmo's Fire, the defining film of the Brat Pack generation. But he gave her one condition: if you want the part, you have to go to rehab. At that time, Demi was nearly destroyed by addiction, but she agreed. For the first time, she had to face herself without alcohol or drugs as armor. "That was the moment I started to wake up," she later said. St. Elmo's Fire didn't just launch her career. It marked the moment she began to awaken from the long nightmare of her childhood. After St. Elmo's fire, Demi officially joined what the media called the Brat Pack, a group of young, ambitious actors defining Hollywood's 1980s youth culture. Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, and now Demi Moore. They were symbols of freedom, rebellion, and success. But behind the magazine covers and glittering parties, Demi was still learning to live sober, each morning a test of her willpower. Her career was rising, but the ghosts of addiction, insecurity, and abandonment still shadowed every step. And just when it seemed her life might be trapped forever in that cycle of glamour and despair, another door opened, a small opportunity that would change everything. A minor television role paying just $750 per episode was enough for Hollywood to finally notice the girl with the sad eyes, the one no one could forget. From the child sold for $500, she would soon become the woman whose smile was worth millions. But little did she know, what awaited her was not salvation, but another circle of glory and destruction. After St. Elmo's fire, Demi Moore didn't just become part of the Brat Pack generation, she became living proof of the power of rebirth. The girl who once trembled in a rehab room was now standing in the heart of Hollywood, sober for the first time in her life. "That was the moment I started to wake up," she later said. That line wasn't just about addiction recovery. It was a declaration of a woman being born again. From small roles in About Last Night and No Small Affair, Demi began to be recognized not just for her beauty, but for the depth behind her sadness. And then, in 1990, the world stood still for a film called Ghost. With Ghost, 1990, Demi Moore reached a height few ever dream of. The film, made on a modest $22 million budget, grossed over $500 million worldwide, a cultural explosion that turned her into an icon of strength laced with vulnerability. As Molly Jensen, the woman who loved so deeply she believed in the impossible, she moved audiences across the globe to tears. Critics praised her performance, while audiences saw in her the image of a modern woman, capable of deep love, yet unbroken by loss. 2 years later, Demi proved she wasn't just a fleeting phenomenon. In A Few Good Men, 1992, she stood between two Hollywood giants, Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, yet never disappeared in their shadows. Her portrayal of Lieutenant Joanne Galloway, the only woman in a testosterone-filled courtroom, solidified her as a serious actress who didn't need ball gowns or tears to command respect. The film grossed over $240 million, and critics wrote, "Moore holds her ground with quiet authority." But just as her career reached its peak, the sky began to crack. Indecent Proposal, 1993, the story of a woman who agrees to spend one night with a stranger to save her husband, made Demi the center of a moral storm. Both audiences and the media blurred the line between character and actress, sneering that Demi Moore had sold her soul to Hollywood. She later said, "It was painful to be seen as a woman who traded herself, when all I did was play a role." The self-worth wounds from her betrayed childhood were ripped open again, this time under the blinding lights of Hollywood. In the midst of that backlash, she did something that shook America. In 1991, while pregnant, Demi posed nude for the cover of Vanity Fair, photographed by Annie Leibovitz. The image was deemed shocking and indecent at the time, but it soon became an enduring symbol of motherhood and female autonomy in pop culture. No longer just Bruce Willis's wife or the girl from Ghost, Demi Moore redefined how Hollywood viewed women: unashamed, unapologetic, and in control of her own image. At 30, Demi stood at the highest point any actress could dream of: fame, fortune, and freedom. But from that peak, a small fracture began to spread. And no one, not even her, could have predicted that the next collapse wouldn't come from Hollywood, but from love. After the uproar over Indecent Proposal, Demi Moore didn't retreat as many expected. She moved forward, and this time, she faced judgment head-on. In 1994, she starred alongside Michael Douglas in Disclosure, a film that flipped gender power dynamics. The harasser wasn't a man, but a woman. As Meredith Johnson, a powerful, sharp, and calculating executive, Demi stunned Hollywood. She exuded sexuality not through her body, but through authority, intelligence, and control. The film immediately ignited controversy. Critics accused it of reversing morality, claiming Demi was using feminism to justify promiscuity. But in that storm, she proved she was more than a pretty face. "I wanted to play a woman who wasn't apologizing for her power," she told Entertainment Weekly. "It wasn't just a role. It was a manifesto from a woman who had once had her self-respect torn apart, now reclaiming control over her image." 2 years later, Demi shook the world again. With Striptease, 1996, she became the highest-paid actress in history, $12.5 million for a single role. It should have been a milestone for women in cinema, but Hollywood, which loves women when they're fragile and hates them when they're strong, refused to forgive her. The press branded her greedy, vulgar, and a sellout. The New York Times wrote, "Her body made headlines, but her courage was ignored." Ironically, Striptease was actually the story of a single mother doing whatever it took to regain custody of her child. But that message was drowned out by ridicule. Demi stood on stage promoting the film, smiling calmly. "I'm proud of my work." Yet behind that smile, she knew the truth. The world would never forgive a woman who earned more than men, who looked straight into the camera without shame. She had shattered Hollywood's glass ceiling, but the shards cut deep into her own skin. And just a year later, in a desperate attempt to prove that courage could redeem dignity, Demi Moore would do the unthinkable: shave her head before the entire world. In 1997, Demi Moore took on the most daring role of her career, Jordan O'Neill in G.I. Jane. Gone was the trademark long hair. She shaved her head on camera, wore combat fatigues, crawled through mud, endured real beatings, and trained with Navy SEALs to fully embody the first woman to enter the U.S. Navy's elite training program. The media called it career suicide. Demi simply said, "I wanted to show that courage has no gender." The performance divided audiences. Many admired her strength and fearlessness, while others mocked her, calling her a radical feminist or attention seeker. G.I. Jane wasn't a major box office hit, but it left a lasting cultural mark. Demi Moore, bald, fierce, unflinching, became the face of a generation of women defying the limits imposed upon them. But as the world applauded Hollywood's new female warrior, Demi began to collapse in silence. After G.I. Jane, she fell into eating disorders, obsessions with body image, weight, and aging, the very weapons Hollywood uses against women. In Inside Out, she wrote, "I punished my body for not being perfect enough. I wanted to disappear into control." Beneath her strong exterior, she was drowning in isolation, celebrated by the world, yet unseen as a person. The price of being Hollywood's female hero wasn't fame or fortune, it was her peace of mind. Glory, money, power, all of it became meaningless when traded for tranquility. And just when she thought she had reached the pinnacle of success, Demi Moore couldn't know that her next fall wouldn't come from her career, but from the one thing she still believed might save her: love. When Demi Moore's career exploded with Ghost and a Few Good Men, she met Bruce Willis, a man who seemed to have stepped out of an entirely different world. At the time, Bruce had just become an action star after Die Hard, exuding a rugged confidence that made Demi, who had grown used to fleeting relationships, suddenly feel protected. They met in 1987 at the premiere of Stakeout. Demi was still engaged to Emilio Estevez, but amid the lights and noise of Hollywood, Bruce needed only one look to throw her off balance. She later recalled, "He walked me to my car, looked at me and said, 'I'm going to marry you.' And 4 months later, he did exactly that." They married in a whirlwind ceremony in Las Vegas, surrounded by applause and intoxicated happiness. The power couple quickly became the symbol of Hollywood love, two superstars at their peak, building a family and living the dream the public called perfect. In 1988, their first daughter, Rumor, was born, followed by Scout in 1991 and Tallulah in 1994. During those years, Demi lived as if inside a rewritten dream. A loving husband, 3 beautiful daughters, and the world at her feet. But even dreams crack. Bruce, the man who once swore to protect her from pain, began to feel suffocated by the very love that had once grounded him. While Demi continued filming around the world and gracing magazine covers, he felt left behind. In Inside Out, she wrote, "He wanted me to stay home, to be the wife and mother, and I wanted to keep working." They loved each other, but they wanted 2 entirely different lives. Between 2 towering careers, they began to lose each other, in the gaps between flights, film sets, and long silent nights. In 1996, Bruce told Playboy, "No woman is going to satisfy a man's natural impulse to procreate, procreate, procreate." The statement shocked the world and was widely read as a confession of infidelity. For Demi, it was a deep cut. She didn't respond publicly. Instead, she retreated from film sets, devoting herself to her 3 daughters and their home in Idaho. The love that once sheltered her had turned into a wall between them. By 1998, after 11 years of marriage, they separated. Yet instead of bitterness or scandal, Demi chose to preserve the one thing that had survived: respect. She wrote, "We felt more connected after the divorce than while we were married." They remained friends, co-parenting their daughters and appearing together at family events as though the marriage had never broken. To the public, it was an act of grace and maturity. But to Demi, it carried a quiet sadness, because she knew she had lost not just a husband, but the first man who had made her believe that love could heal the past. Afterward, as she tried to close her heart and focus on her children, Hollywood turned its back on her. Her mother passed away, and she found herself alone in the echoing silence of her Idaho home. "I thought peace would come with silence," she said. "But silence can be deafening when the heart is empty." She had once possessed everything: fame, fortune, love, family. But for the first time in her life, Demi Moore faced the one thing she could not fill with success: emptiness. And just when she believed nothing could stir her heart again, fate opened a new chapter. A love that was younger, impulsive, and ultimately more brutal than any wound she had ever known. After her 1998 divorce, Demi Moore thought the breaking would end there. But only a few months later, fate struck again, this time crueler than ever. Her mother, Virginia Gines, passed away from brain cancer on July 2, 1998. The woman who had caused her so much pain died in her arms, leaving behind a silence that was both heartbreaking and liberating. Demi later said, "When she died, I stopped running. For the first time, I had to sit with everything I had been trying to escape. It was a shock that nearly broke her completely." Losing at the same time the man she had believed was her safe harbor and the mother she had just learned to forgive, Demi withdrew from the spotlight, as if stepping away from a battlefield that had left too many scars. She took her 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, to Idaho, where pine forests stretched endlessly and the Snake River flowed quietly, to start over. There, Demi was no longer a movie star, no longer Hollywood's female warrior, but simply a mother learning to stand again after 2 devastating losses: love and her roots. She gradually cut back on work, turning down major film offers in the late 1990s and early 2000s, choosing instead to live quietly in a wooden lakeside home. "I needed to step away and be a mom. I needed to heal," she said. After years of burning herself out in roles like Indecent Proposal and G.I. Jane, her body and mind were completely exhausted. Demi began meditating, reading books on psychology, and revisiting unfinished childhood journals as a way to rediscover who she was beneath the fame. But Hollywood is not a place that forgives absence. While she was learning to breathe again, the film world moved on. A new generation of stars, Gwyneth Paltrow, Cameron Diaz, Angelina Jolie, was rising. And Demi, once the highest-paid actress in the world, was now labeled too old, too expensive. The calls stopped coming. No leading roles, no Oscar invitations. She began to realize that silence could be more brutal than criticism. Instead of fighting for the spotlight, Demi focused on healing. She founded her own production company, Moving Pictures, choosing projects for meaning rather than fame. She devoted herself to her daughters, maintained a warm friendship with Bruce Willis, and slowly accepted that not every ending means loss. And yet, amid the foggy mornings of Idaho, between the laughter of her children and the quiet family dinners, there remained an ache that never faded. The emptiness of a woman who had lived through every extreme of fame, yet still did not know what peace truly felt like. She thought she had escaped all the storms, but Hollywood never lets anyone rest for long. In 2003, when Demi Moore reappeared at the premiere of Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, the world was stunned. At 41, after years of retreat, she was breathtaking, a mix of pride and fragility that no one could look away from. And that very night, Ashton Kutcher, a rising star 15 years her junior, walked into her life like an unexpected gust of wind. At the time, Ashton was at the peak of that 70s show, young, funny, radiant, everything Demi thought she had lost. They met at a party and talked for hours, as if two strangers had somehow recognized each other from another lifetime. She wrote in Inside Out, "It was almost as if we'd known each other for years." Ashton later admitted in an interview, "I was totally in love with her. It didn't feel like an age gap at all." Their love came fast and consumed everything. Demi, who had lost faith after her divorce from Bruce Willis, felt alive again. "He made me feel young again," she wrote. They traveled together, practiced yoga, cooked meals with Demi's 3 daughters, and filled the Beverly Hills house with laughter. Paparazzi photos captured Ashton carrying Tallulah on his shoulders and Rumor hugging his neck, images of a family that seemed to have found warmth again. In 2005, they married in a private ceremony at Demi's Beverly Hills home. Bruce Willis attended and smiled, giving his blessing, a rare moment of harmony between past and present. Demi believed she had finally found the one who would walk beside her for life. But it wasn't a fairy tale. She became pregnant just months after the wedding. They had already chosen a name for their unborn daughter, Chaplain Ray. But the baby died at 6 months. "It was my deepest heartbreak," she wrote in her memoir. The loss reopened every old wound, her childhood, her mother's death, her loneliness, and for the first time in 2 decades of sobriety, Demi picked up a glass of wine. From that point, everything began to fracture. Ashton, raised in another generation, didn't know how to handle her grief. He grew distant, began partying more, his eyes wandering whenever he stood next to her. Demi recalled, "He wanted to drink wine at dinner, and I wanted to be the cool wife who could handle it. So I joined him." She didn't realize that with every drink, she was taking one step back toward the abyss she had once escaped. Then came the experiments in their marriage, what Demi later called a distorted attempt to keep him interested. She agreed to a threesome, only to watch Ashton cheat later on. When the news broke, she fell apart. Because we'd brought a third party into our relationship, she wrote. He used it as an excuse to blur the lines. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the moment she realized she had lost herself trying to hold on to someone who was already gone. In 2011, Demi publicly announced their separation. 2 years later, they finalized their divorce. In an Esquire interview, Ashton admitted, "Divorce feels like a wholesale failure. You failed at love, at trust, at everything." But for Demi, the greatest loss wasn't him. It was herself. Her health collapsed. She lost extreme amounts of weight and was hospitalized after suffering a seizure at home from a combination of sedatives and stimulants. During that time, her daughters avoided her. The Idaho home that once echoed with laughter was now filled only with silence and shadows. It wasn't until she woke up in the hospital that she realized the most terrifying truth. The problem wasn't that Ashton had left. It was that she had abandoned herself for too long. "I had been living in survival mode my entire life," she told the New York Times. She had once believed that love could save her, but sometimes love is the very drug that makes you forget how to live. And just when it seemed everything was over, when Hollywood had forgotten her, her family fractured, and the world believed Demi Moore had fallen, she rose again through the one thing that had always saved her, the truth. Because her next act wasn't a movie, but a confession. Inside Out, the explosive memoir in which Demi Moore bared the entire journey of a girl once sold by her mother for $500 who grew into a woman brave enough to tell the truth in the most dishonest town on earth. After years of drifting between regret and pain, Demi Moore began a different kind of journey. Not to find love, but to find herself again. She entered therapy, learning to name her pain instead of burying it. Each session, each journal entry, each quiet moment staring out the window in Idaho was part of her lesson in something that once seemed simple: how to live without pretending to be strong. Her daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, slowly came back to her. After years of anger and silence, they began writing letters, visiting, and finally embracing one another for a long time inside the wooden house by the Snake River. On Mother's Day 2020, Tallulah wrote, "We healed through self-reflection and forgiveness." That forgiveness didn't arrive with grand gestures. It came softly, like sunlight filtering through leaves after a storm. In 2019, Demi released her memoir, Inside Out, a book that made all of Hollywood go quiet. In it, she unearthed everything long buried: a childhood marked by addiction and violence, broken marriages, relapses, and the journey of rising again after feeling spiritually dead. The New York Times called it brutally honest, courageous, and profoundly human. In an interview with Good Morning America, Demi summed it up simply, "I think it's a story about learning to love yourself. Finally." From then on, she was no longer the scandal-ridden star or the sex symbol of the 90s. Demi Moore re-emerged as a serene, grounded woman who chose to live among the forests of Idaho, starting each morning with meditation, yoga, and cold water plunges. No phones, no press, no red carpets, only wind, water, and breath. "Cold plunges are my reset," she said. "They make me feel alive." She maintained a close relationship with Bruce Willis, her ex-husband, now battling dementia. Demi often visited, cooked meals, and helped Bruce's wife care for him. The Willis Moore family became a rare example of divorce done right, separated but still deeply united. When asked about Ashton Kutcher, she simply smiled. "I wish him peace, that's all." No bitterness, no resentment, just the calm of someone who has lived through every shape of pain. Today, Demi no longer seeks fame. She seeks light, the kind of light born from the deepest darkness. Yet even she could not have imagined that stepping away from Hollywood would lead the world to speak her name again, not for her old films, but for something entirely different. Just when it seemed Demi Moore had closed every door to Hollywood, fate brought her back. Not as the sex symbol of the past, but as living proof of the power of rebirth. After years of quiet living in Idaho, Demi made a stunning return in 2024, transformed. Gone was the wounded woman. On the Cannes red carpet, she appeared in a breathtaking black gown, calm smile, steady gaze, as if finally at peace with herself. Her new film, The Substance, premiered and instantly shocked critics, a daring exploration of age, the body, and the obsession with perfection. Subjects Demi herself had wrestled with all her life. The film earned her a 2025 Oscar nomination for Best Actress, marking a triumphant comeback after more than 2 decades of Hollywood exile. That same year, she was chosen to host the prestigious AMFAR Gala at Cannes, raising funds for HIV/AIDS research, and became the face of the message, "The Beauty of Resilience." People magazine wrote, "Demi Moore has returned not as a star, but as a survivor with grace." She also appeared at Elle Women in Hollywood 2024, reunited with her Now and Then co-stars, and spoke passionately about creating a new generation of women in Hollywood where age is no longer the enemy. Amid all the glittering events, she kept her simple rhythm. Cold plunges in the Idaho mountains each morning, yoga, meditation, and time spent writing scripts. "Cold plunges are my reset," she told The Times. "They remind me that I'm still alive, still learning." Demi continued to nurture her warm bond with Bruce Willis. She and her daughters frequently visited him, celebrating birthdays together with Bruce's wife and family. Images of them gathered in sunlight-filled rooms moved the world, a rare portrait of love and maturity after heartbreak. And when asked once more about Ashton Kutcher, she gave the same gentle answer, "I wish him peace, that's all." Short, light, but enough to close a stormy chapter. In 2025, Demi amazed the public again when she appeared at the Met Gala wearing a unique Tom Brown gown, a design blending nostalgia and rebellion, much like her own life. She joined the cast of I Love Boosters, an upcoming Boots Riley film set for 2026, and supported the opening of Cine Vita, an art house cinema space in Los Angeles. Amid the cameras and crowds, the world now sees a different Demi Moore, calm, grounded, and real. No longer the girl sold by her mother for $500, nor the movie star who earned $12 million for a single role, but a 62-year-old woman living with truth, gratitude, and a love for the small, unbuyable things in life. And perhaps the most astonishing thing of all is this. When the world thought Demi Moore had closed her story, she opened a new one. Not to be praised, but to remind us that some souls only truly shine after walking through their deepest darkness. Throughout more than 4 decades, Demi Moore has given the world more than unforgettable performances. She has drawn a living map of resilience. From the abandoned little girl in Roswell to the woman who dared to face her past before the entire world, her journey has changed how Hollywood sees women, aging, and the scars that shape us. Before Demi, few actresses stood on equal ground with men in Hollywood negotiations. When she earned $12.5 million for Striptease, the highest salary for an actress at the time, the industry mocked her as greedy, arrogant, and past her prime. But looking back now, it's clear that the moment she was laughed at was the one that opened the door for those who followed. Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, Charlize Theron, all benefited from the quiet battle Demi had fought. She was also among the first to shatter the image of how women were supposed to appear in the media. Her 1991 Vanity Fair nude cover, taken while she was pregnant, wasn't just a cultural shock. It was a declaration that true beauty needs no disguise. Back then, it was called a scandal. Today, it's celebrated as a feminist milestone. With Ghost, she made the world weep for love. With G.I. Jane, she earned men's respect through strength. With Inside Out, She taught women how to forgive themselves. And through her life itself, Demi Moore showed that the things meant to destroy us are often the very forces that make us eternal. It was no coincidence that when The Substance premiered at Cannes in 2024, the audience stood and applauded for 8 minutes. They weren't just celebrating a role, they were honoring a survivor. As Time magazine wrote, Demi Moore has become the archetype of the modern survivor, broken, brave, and still luminous. Today, Demi Moore is no longer chasing roles or fame. She has become a quiet teacher, an unspoken guide for women who have stumbled, been misunderstood, or hidden their tears behind makeup. She shows them that vulnerability is not weakness, but the most honest part of being human. And perhaps that is her greatest legacy, not in her films or her golden era photographs, but in the way she's taught the world to look inward and see that sometimes the most beautiful thing isn't perfection, but the courage to embrace your scars. Yet what makes her story truly remarkable is this. At 62, when she could have stopped, she chose to begin again. Because as Demi said in an interview after her Oscar nomination, "I'm not done living. I'm just finally living as me." In the end, Demi Moore is no longer a symbol of beauty or scandal. She is a testament to rebirth. Her story is not meant to evoke pity, but to remind us that while no one escapes pain, we always have the power to choose how we rise from it. In a world that worships youth and condemns mistakes, Demi has proven that truth is the only power that never fades. She doesn't try to relive her 20s or chase lost fame. She simply lives honestly, deeply, and beautifully in acceptance. And perhaps that is what makes her shine brighter than ever before. The story of Demi Moore doesn't belong only to Hollywood. It belongs to anyone who has ever been hurt, fallen, or wondered if they could begin again. Because if a girl once sold for $500 could stand up and rewrite her life in light, then so can we. And what about you? When you look back at the cracks in your own life, will you hide them or let the light seep through? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow our channel for more stories told with honesty, courage, and heart.